Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Alexander and today we are interviewing our special guest, Ken Goudsward, author of plenty of books including UFOs in the Bible and his newest one, the Fermi Paradox Bullshit. Hello Ken, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, I'm really glad that you are here. And firstly, I would like you to introduce us with your overall research and what are your books all about.
Sure. So I'm actually sort of studying a lot of different things, but they're all kind of related in a way, but it might not necessarily be obvious. For example, I don't. All my books are not about UFOs, but all of them are kind of, sort of about UFOs, or there's like some kind of strange connection where, like, really, it's all about questioning sort of the way that we interpret things traditionally. And so my work on the Bible specifically is very much like that way in terms of like the sightings of various things that the authors of the Bible talk about. We now interpret them through this theological lens that they did not have the same understanding and assumptions that we are kind of projecting back on them. So I try to strip those off and then I look at what they're actually telling us and what they're describing. And um, like at first, my UFOs in the Bible, I was like, basically just I wanted to find out if any of the crap that the guys on Ancient Aliens say is even legitimately, like even remotely like feasible. And so I looked at um, all the different um, areas that they usually talk about, like Ezekiel and the prophet Elijah and Isaiah and some of these guys, and plus a lot more. And I ended up coming up with 45. I think it was 45 or 43 completely different sightings that do appear to sound like UFO sightings. They're very similar to the types of things that people today are still witnessing. Um, so we have this phenomenon of UFO, like they're unidentified, and like literally that's what a UFO is. It's something in the sky that we don't really understand, and that's exactly what these guys in the Bible are describing. And they use a lot of strange language, and they use some technical terms which only appear in those very specific events. And then a couple hundred years later, somebody decided, oh, well, they were talking about angels. Well, the word angel is not in the Hebrew Bible. The concept of an angel in terms of like a guy with wings is not in the Bible, in the Old Testament. I mean, it becomes a thing in the New Testament because of the Greek influence. But in the Hebrew Bible, we don't find that. Instead, we find metallic discs. We find fire, thunder, like very loud objects that are coming from the sky, and they're shaking the mountains. So that's kind of what I delve into in UFOs in the Bible. Um, and then that kind of got me interested in this whole idea of well, if these guys were seeing this, in 500 BC and in 1300 BC and in probably around 2000 BC, then like what else is there that could um, like can I get a second opinion on some of these? So I started looking at other sources, and I turned to the Sumerian literature because it's from the same period. And so I did a study on the Sumerian Enuma Elish, and I'm currently doing another one on the Atrahasis epic, which is typically understood as a flood story, but it's so much more than that, and it tells of extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth and created basically what we now can assume is us. It's a lot of the kind of things that Zecharia Sitchin talks about, but the problem I have with Sitchin is he does not tell us where he is reading from. He doesn't tell us what the original texts are talking about. He just says, he'll talk about a specific word, and his interpretation of it, and kind of go off on a tangent. And I think some of the things that he's come up with are probably at least partly correct. But from my reading of the Sumerian texts myself, I know that some of Sitchin's interpretations are way out to lunch. Like, for example, Nibiru. Nibiru is not a planet at all. If you read my Enuma Elish book, I explain how I get to the conclusion, and I walk you through the original text of why and how I'm thinking this. And it turns out that the Nibiru is basically sort of a location in the sky, like it's a mathematical point on a star map, is essentially what it is. And this goes back to the fact that Enki and Marduk are celestial navigators. Like the story talks about in some parts of it how they're flying through the sky and they're mapping stars and making databases and stuff like this. So it's quite fascinating. And then that also got me into another book which just came out this weekend as well, that I partnered up with Barbara DeLong, and we co-wrote this book called Before Roswell. And the idea there is we examine the UFO phenomenon going back through history and into prehistoric times to see, basically the UFOs have been here all along. So it really is like the intro for the Ancient Aliens show says, we are not alone. We have never been alone. And there's actually good evidence for that in the ancient texts.
Yes, I found your commentary on Enuma Elish and your analysis of the biblical stories that are very similar to the UFO phenomena very interesting, and you've really provided us with plenty of details, including the Hebrew translations and including like different translations from different versions. It was really valuable for me to just see all of that, and I think that many of those things are, maybe we cannot describe what really was there, but you've provided us with real technical analysis, and I think it is really helpful because plenty of scholars that are actually making any comments on those texts do not know anything about those technical stuff, and just as you told at the beginning, interpret it through the lens of theology or through the lens of philology or our knowledge about the ancient times. And I think that sometimes we have to change a little bit our thinking and our seeing of what is there. Your books were really interesting, and you've provided us with plenty of details. I'm very interested in your latest book, the Fermi Paradox bullshit. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Because here you've got author of Fermi's Paradox bullshit, and I think that plenty of people would like to know about it.
Yeah, for sure. So probably a lot of your viewers will have heard of Fermi's Paradox. But just in case we need to refresh our memory, basically the idea is there's so many planets and so many stars with planets around them, and so many of these have to be at least capable of supporting life. And so there's the statistical argument that essentially there has to be intelligent life out there somewhere. And so then the follow-up question to that is, okay, well, where are they? Where is everybody? and that's supposedly a paradox. But it isn't a paradox at all, because to ask the question, where are they, is to say that you have to have stuck your head in the sand and ignored thousands of years of data, and of literary data, as well as firsthand commentary and eyewitness accounts of people who have been saying all along, for thousands of years. So as long as we have recorded history, there are accounts of people seeing things coming from the sky, uh, people coming out of these craft, and interacting with people in a lot of different ways, often in simply telling them a story, or giving them a task to do, or whatever it is. But in pretty much every case, radically changing the lives of these witnesses. Because when you see something like this, your life is changed. You can no longer ignore the fact that this is a reality. And right now, on the face of the earth, there are millions of people who have witnessed this, and still yet they are really struggling in terms of getting people to take them seriously, or even they're afraid to even talk about it, because there's for a long time there has been this. Well, this, I guess, like it's not okay to talk about it. I mean,
Like a
maybe,
taboo.
yeah, it's like a taboo. And a lot of people have been fired. A lot of people have lost their jobs and even their careers, because they happened to be standing there when something came down from the sky. Like, that's so ridiculous. Um, and so, to me, that's a huge problem, and it needed to be addressed. So that's why I wrote this book. And basically, it's all well and fine for the skeptic to stand there and poo-poo it and go, yeah, well, I don't believe in it. But you know what? It's those skeptics. Now, they're not necessarily meaning to do harm, but they're doing harm. They're causing immense harm, by creating this culture of taboo, a culture where you're not allowed to talk about it, a culture where you will be ridiculed, you might lose your job, nobody's being taken seriously, and things are not investigated as well as they should be or could be. Um, and even when there's all this evidence right in front of us, and thank God that culture is starting to change very gradually, and we now have people coming forward and talking about things that they've seen like 30 years ago, because they've been hiding it all this time, and now finally they feel, okay, maybe it's a safe time to begin to talk about that. So it's both frustrating and encouraging to see that this is still happening, but at least there's a little bit of a cultural shift where it's becoming okay to talk about.
Yes, I think that even programs like Ancient Aliens, etc., helped many of people who encountered something different, who maybe encountered UFOs, who maybe were even abducted. And I think that because of such programs, even though they sometimes, show us theories that may be outstanding and that may not be true actually, but I think that
Hmm.
such programs and such open-mindedness to actually talk about it and to speculate whether it was this, whether it was that, whether it were aliens or something else, I think that it is helpful. And I think that we should now and in the future just have all of the evidence, have all of the phenomena, and have all of the eyewitness accounts on the table, put them on the table, and then see what happens, and then see what points are connected and what picture emerges. And I
That's
think,
right.
as you mentioned, the skeptics may provide many harmful things because, for instance, they may ignore something. And science is about going for the truth and about mirroring the truth in the theory theories and in the hypothesis. And how can we go to the truth, and how can we reveal the truth if we ignore some aspect because it is uncomfortable for us, because it does not fit our theories? And I also do not like do not like not only disbelievers but the skeptics, because I think that it is good to be skeptical and to just be skeptical about the facts, if they are true, or if they are just false, or if they are hoaxes. But it is a different way to be skeptical and to believe in skepticism, that be skeptical of everything and make of this skepticism a belief system. And I think that this is unscientific, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. That's totally right. And in fact, it's kind of odd that the skeptics, there are skeptics who are seeking to find truth by looking for evidence, and I applaud that. But there are also skeptics who are just stubborn and refuse to even talk about what's outside their already established belief system, and that's problematic. But that's also problematic on the believers. So even the people who maybe they did witness a UFO, or maybe they had an encounter themselves, or even were abducted. Some of these people are also falling into the same trap, where they're adding extra. Like they're embellishing, or they're making up stuff. They're some people are just plain out lying about the things that they claim to have seen. And you mentioned frauds, and unfortunately, there have been a lot of frauds in the whole paranormal realm, and that includes UFOs, but also a lot of other things. Ghost stories, Mothman, crop circles, you name it. There's somebody out there who's like making shit up and saying that it's real. Like, those guys are actually doing more damage to the discussion than the skeptics are, because it provides really great fuel for the skeptics, and then they can assume that everything is fake if they can prove one is. But that's also a real problem, because you don't, if you're a scientist, you take a bunch of tests, and then if you find out one of your tests was invalid, you throw away the results from that test. But you also have to determine, does that mean that all of your tests were flawed? It might, but it might not. And in the case of a fraud, just because one person pulls off a fraud certainly has nothing to do with anybody else's testimonies or their experiences. So to lump them in the same bucket is highly problematic. Actually, the main focus of this book is looking at the evidence, and it's really not about UFO evidence, although that plays into it in one chapter. But most of the book is about the scientific evidence, the astronomical evidence, and basically we look at all kinds of scientific facts. Like, for example, is there water in space? This is a question, well, we wonder, I don't know, is there water in space? Well, it's stupid to even ask that question now, because and in fact, the only reason we can is because the data has been suppressed. And so we don't even realize, the general public does not know that we already have an answer to that question. And the answer is, yeah, there's tons of water in space. It has been estimated that there's I wish I could remember the number. My numbers are flipping out of my head here. But there's way more water in space in the solar system than there is on Earth. So even just in our tiny space neighborhood of our solar system, Earth has lots of water, but the water on Earth is nothing compared to the water in the rest of the planets even. So Jupiter, Mars, like actually pretty much every planet in the solar system, we've found at least some traces of water, as well as traces of atmosphere. And that it may or may not include the right levels that we like to call atmosphere. But regardless, there are gases and liquids and solid forms of all the elements that we require for life. And these are found on all the planets in our solar system. Heat becomes an issue. And so a lot of people like to talk about the Goldilocks zone, whereas when you're orbiting a star, if you're too close, it's going to be too hot and everything will burn up. If you're too far away, it's too cold, everything's frozen, there's no liquid. So it is problematic, but you got to remember that let's look at Pluto, for example. So Pluto is quite far away, but even there is evidence that there was once liquid water. How is this possible? Well, we might not know exactly all the details, but we do know that the temperature gradient around the sun that exists right now is not the same as it used to be long, long ago. And in fact, all of the solid planets, including Pluto, were once melted. Like they were the rock planets formed from molten lava. It's obvious that Pluto used to be hot and has cooled down. And so at some point during that cooling off period, conditions would have been very nice, and it would have been quite a nice place for us to enjoy, like sitting on a beach. And basically the same is true of all the planets. Not necessarily, like I'm simplifying greatly right here, just for the sake of, I don't want to talk about that for 20 minutes. But yeah, so we do go into quite a lot of detail on that, like where these various elements of life are found. And it's not just in our solar system even. It's there's now been hundreds, possibly thousands of exoplanets found that are orbiting around other stars, and water has been confirmed on many of those as well. So there's all this stuff. So we look at that, and those are like, that's not even fringe science at all. That's just plain old normal astronomy. But that data is not filtering back into the popular conscious with sort of the, what does this mean for us? Like, because these are pieces of scientific data that hugely impact the more philosophical questions, and that connection is really not being made. I don't know. Maybe it'll take another 20 years for that to happen, or not, or maybe a lot of people will read my book and it'll happen really quickly. But so there's all that kind of stuff, and then it gets into some other sort of more strange stuff, but it's still just as scientifically accurate. For example, beyond our own solar system, we've now been sending probes out into deep space, into interstellar space, the space between stars, and even there, we're finding traces of. I'm not going to say traces of life, but I will say traces of organic chemistry, which are basically the elements that sort of like molecules that are similar to the molecules that make up the human body and every other life form that we know, and even bits of sort of the building blocks of DNA. So we haven't yet found actual DNA strands, but we have found the precursors to those molecules that DNA is made out of. and we're finding them way out in deep space, beyond any kind of and like there's no way that any life that as we know it would be able to survive there. So where is this coming from? Is it being created out there, or has it been blasted off from other planets, or like so? These are the kind of questions that scientists are now looking into, and it turns out that some of these organic elements are actually being formed in the nebula, which is where stars begin. So the proto elements of life are actually being formed at the same time that stars are being formed. So that means that life itself could be as ancient as the first stars. So where we used to think of life in terms of the stars are created and then they cool down and then planets are created and then we have to wait a long time and then finally life somehow emerges. No, all those steps are being peeled back, and it's possible or feasible that life might exist in interstellar space or even in galactic nebulas that don't even have suns. Maybe they're there before suns even congeal, before stars. So when Carl Sagan said that we are all star stuff, I think he probably didn't know the stuff that they're finding now, but boy, they're really proving him right.
Yes, it was really interesting while I was reading your book, this Fermi's Paradox bullshit, and it was really interesting because you've provided us with plenty of detailed information, plenty of which was really new from like the last 10 years or so. And I think that there is right now this paradigm shift or this shift of how we view life, because before we thought that life was scarce, that we are really lucky to even exist, and that it was only Earth that can inhabit life.
Mhm.
But what if we shifted this vision and just saw life as just ordinary as matter? Like, planets are ordinary, stars are ordinary in our view of the cosmos. What if life, as you mentioned, also is ordinary and can also be, as you mentioned, even before or during the formation of the stars? And I think that we need this paradigm shift, this shift of vision, because this model of scarce life, I think, don't stand the test of time.
Mhm. Yeah, and really, what good is it doing us? That concept has turned us into arrogant bastards, and that is
Yes.
why we feel like we're entitled to destroy
Superior.
or yeah, exactly. And so it's a really unhealthy mindset. It has allowed us to overpopulate, to colonize, to extract and rape and pillage wherever we feel fit because we're the best. Um, and also, I think it plays into some religious ideas, whereas, like, well, we see humans as the pinnacle of creation, and we have this big story to back it up. But like you said, that doesn't hold water, and but yet, so I don't want to say that it discounts religion, because it sort of does, but it also sort of backs up religion in a way, because um, if you think about all the vast expanse of the universe, and then imagine that maybe there's some bits of life, even if it's tiny, amoebas or bacteria or something like that. If let's just say that the universe is full of bacteria. Okay, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But if it is, that also has profound implications, because some other new science that, again, a lot of this stuff is just being discovered. Even in the last 2 or 3 years, um, people have been doing a lot of experiments, and they're talking about it more, and there's this openness, and there's thanks to the internet and stuff like that, we have so much information sharing going on, that we're able to learn exponentially faster than we ever have been. And so the scientific community is leveraging that knowledge and is jumping into places that have never been possible in terms of research. So one of those things is with bacterial and other microscopic life forms, and just really digging into what's really going on there, and you know, rather than simply describing them at an anatomical level, they're actually starting to apply like behavioral sciences and things like that to these microscopic life forms. And lo and behold, it turns out that bacteria are able to communicate with each other. And not only that, but they're able to act intelligently on a group level. So in some ways, you could almost say that amoeba are more intelligent than humans. Also, why I say that is because the amoeba look at their environment and they change their behavior. That they have various members that are taking up data, making measurements in terms of their own senses, and communicating that information back to the group, to the bacterial colony, and the colony then essentially talks about it and decides all together to what approach they need to do, and then they go ahead and they make that change. That is something that humans cannot do. I mean, we should be able to do, but we don't. When we take in data, most of the time we ignore it, or we ridicule it, or we kick those guys out of their jobs, or you know, whatever. It's just there. It doesn't make its way up to the people who are making decisions in terms of government, policymakers, social change, all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're starting to get better at it, but we still really suck at it. And so I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that bacteria are better at that particular skill than humans are, because I mean, we have so much to learn. And so if bacteria are able to do that stuff, now let's go back to my supposition. Suppose that bacteria are all over the universe. And we already know that they're able to take in information, communicate, and make intelligent decisions. Okay, as a colony, so where does that colony divide? Well, we don't know. Maybe the entire universe is one single colony that is intelligent, that is communicating amongst itself, and is able to make intelligent decisions. Well, then effectively that colony of bacteria is God. So the universe itself has a conscience. And that's not, I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, or that I believe that, or that that's real, but it's absolutely possible. It's not fantasy, and it's not science fiction. It's not quite fact, because we haven't, you know, we need a lot more data before we can decide if that seems to be the case or not. But it's certainly scientifically possible.
Yes, it is very interesting, this adaptability of those microbes, bacteria, and now humans. You know, throughout the like millions of years of evolution, humanity was adapting more and more, but we came to a point in our ignorance, in our ego, that we actually stopped adapting that much. Of course, we sometimes adapt a little bit, but we really slowed down in this adaptability. So I think that it can also be that in the terms of evolution, we may be at the peak, and it depends on us if we choose to adapt more to the environment and to evolve and to survive, or just we will be ignorant, we will be like disbelieving everything and ignoring. And if we maybe, who knows, go extinct, right? It's
Right.
very interesting. And maybe these bacteria, because we think of intelligent life like humanoid aliens like us, but who knows if we are making so little progress in adaptability, and we know in evolution that adaptability is the most important. So maybe that's how those microbes just got, everywhere in the universe, and why there are no that much humanoid aliens, because maybe they, like we, go went ignorant in their way of
Right.
living.
Yeah. I mean, I my personal belief is that there is no such thing as a human species. I myself am a colony of microbial life forms, and I touch on that a tiny bit in the book, but that's not really what this book is about. I'll probably write another book about that. Um, uh, but there's again, it's very odd that we have to question everything we know. We have to question our own identity, um, in terms of like if we're going to survive, we can no longer just think of ourselves as this is me. I want a hamburger. I want the basic things that we want are so short-sighted and selfish, and we care nothing about the broader sense of community, which is really that's kind of the differentiator between us and the bacteria. Is the bacteria are not selfish. The bacteria as a colony are selfish,
Hmm.
in terms of they will attack another species or whatever, but they're working as a team. They don't fight amongst themselves. You don't have bacteria waging war against their own members of their own colony. That's not something that bacteria do. That's not something that most animals do. That is a specifically human trait. Um, Now, maybe there is some tribalism in, like, say, wolf packs or things like that, and we do see that, and it even in lions and elephants and other, fairly intelligent mammals. So it's something that we have evolved, but we evolved it a long time ago, while we were just a mammal. But it's like basically what I'm saying is this is a problem in our evolution that we are not going to be able to get rid of easily, because it's not necessarily a human or a recent thing that developed, but it's been with us for millions of years, before we were even human. We just happen to have perfected the art of selfishness.
Yes, yes, it is very interesting. Maybe, it's like a lesson for us. And if we
Mhm.
pass, if we go forward, or if we go extinct. It is very interesting because these colonies are like the collective consciousness. And I
Yeah.
think that our job right now is also to go on the collective, to stop fighting each other. And of course, not maybe like bacteria go fight another things like the animals or the planet. It would be also destructive, but
Yeah.
just go and unite on the collective. And it is very interesting because I'm in this spiritual metaphysical stuff, that there are lots of like channeled information and other spiritual stuff that speaks about the evolution of consciousness and about this uniting more and more, that then we are individuals once, then we are on the collective, like the planet, the humanity, and then we go further and further. And like this bacteria or collective consciousness, who knows if, like in our bodies, as you mentioned, we are just plenty of microbes, bacteria, etc. And we are like the collective, but being conscious of one. And who knows if it isn't like this micro and macrocosm, like it goes
Yeah.
further and further, like the planet is also thinking that it is the one, and maybe it is looking at other planets in a way that we look at people. And maybe
Yeah.
then the star systems, the galaxies. I think it's very interesting that we see this correspondence on this macroscopic level, and it goes and goes and goes, and it's very like it shifts our point of view.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, that's not a new perspective by any means.
Of course.
And you know, this whole concept of as above, so below, and these types of things, and these have been with us for quite a long time, and a lot of people are doing a lot of work to try to sort of propagate that knowledge. And you know, I commend those efforts. What I do see is that there's this gap maybe between some of that knowledge and wisdom, and the more scientific or more data driven or qualitative side of things. And I think that there is room for closing that gap, and that's sort of one thing that I'm interested in, is beginning to bridge that gap by talking about these more metaphysical or paranormal ideas, in scientific terms and backed by scientific data, and also addressing or approaching the scientific data with an understanding of the more metaphysical side of that wisdom, and kind of those principles, or whatever you might want to say. Like, there's these organizing principles that appear to be, at least have some level of truth to them. And so for science to ignore that is not really doing the job of science, because science is supposed to look at all the available data. And so that's sort of where I see myself, is I'm a little bit kind of a foot in both worlds, and you know, and I understand the limits to both sides. So I'm a little bit skeptical of you know, some of the more woo-woo stuff, but I'm also skeptical about a lot of the science, because we have these interpretations or these conclusions that were drawn without considering this whole other huge field of data that really needs to be considered. And so I think that really it comes down to questioning, and you know, we need to really be questioning everything, and looking at things from different perspectives, as many different perspectives as we can, and integrating all kinds of points of view. So I think it's important that the experiencers and the scientists begin to work together, and that there has been, you know, it's not like that's never happened, but it's not really still the normal thing, and it's difficult for you know, I mean, everybody's different, and we all have different ways of perceiving the world and of processing information, and our minds work differently. I really like I'm a big fan of the term what is it, neurodivergence. So, like, you know, we're all on a spectrum, because there is a lot of different ways of looking at the world. And when you sit down with somebody who's not thinking the same way that you are, it can be really difficult to communicate, and even to get along. And that's one problem, is that we're so quick to write people off, or to judge, or you know, put a label on people, and it's really not helpful. And instead, I think we need to be having long-term conversations and relationships, where we begin to almost like I want to use an analogy of like a fungus, where they'll put out their roots, and they grow towards each other and intertwine, and eventually you can't tell the difference. And I think that's what we as people need to be doing, focusing on more, is making those connections. And it's not easy, but it's probably vital to our survival.
Yes, like we mentioned, these colonies and this and becoming this collective, like the bacteria, and it's
Hmm.
very interesting because we say that we should like connect and that we should become collective, and it is very interesting from the standpoint of metaphysics, spirituality, in which we are seeing that all of the universe is the evolution, going back to the source in many religions and spiritual traditions, like uniting so much that you can't tell the difference between the parts and that everything becomes actually one. So, like, we
Hmm.
go to the source and all is one once again, maybe if it was in the past. It's very interesting because, we've been speaking about like material stuff, like, microbes, like
Hmm.
these exoplanets, and as we see, it all connects with everything else. And I think that we should not, as you mentioned in your books, ignore any one aspect, but try to connect and try to like have all of the evidence and see what picture is being drawn by all of these facts.
Yeah, exactly. The picture is such a great way to phrase that. Um, and there's this field of philosophy called ontology, which is the study of what exists. So, I mean, that's a pretty huge question. What exists? And I think that it's impossible to answer that question in in one particular view, because really everything that we do is based on thought processes and ideas and concepts and structures that we build up out of those ideas. And uh, really, all we're doing is in our mind, we are creating constructs of concepts that mirror reality, but not even reality. It's removed a step because they mirror our perceptions of what we've
Mm-hmm.
seen of reality. So in our we're mentally building these models, really. And so
Mm-hmm.
we're building models, and there's a lot of different ways that you can model a thing. So I was a few years ago, I was really into model railroads, and I liked to have these trains that were very detailed, and they looked as close as I could. I wanted them to look like the real train. And I would paint them so that they were dirty and grimy, because that's what a real train looks like. So that's one way to model a train. Um, but another way is Thomas the Tank Engine. So he has doesn't really look like a real train, but you know what? He moves by himself, and he has like this intelligence, in a way that a real train does have intelligence, because it's computerized. At least the modern ones are. But even an old steam engine is intelligent in terms of being a very complex mechanical machine. And so, in that regard, Thomas the Tank Engine is a better model than my HO scale, the thing that looks really real, right? So it depends. Are you modeling appearance, or are you modeling functionality, or are you modeling some other thing? And so there's, I like to think of each of those as a dimension. So an appearance is a dimension. Um, Basically, you could make a two-dimensional graph, right? You could map uh, appearance on the x-axis and functionality on a y-axis. Well, that's only two dimensions. Literally, you can think of millions. Like, there's almost no limit to how many dimensions there are, and these are real. So you hear about like some kind of like conceptual physicists will like to talk about 11 dimensional space and string theory, and 4D, and is our 3D space a um, what's the word? I can't think of the word. But like, basically, there's these different ways that we use the word dimensions, and so they've come to mean a certain thing. Then on the more sort of metaphysical side, you have people talking about dimensions in terms of like multi-dimensional beings. So perhaps the grays are from a different planet, or perhaps they are from a different dimension. And what does that mean? Well, that means something, again, different, but sort of the same. And so I think even the word dimension is fascinating. Like, you could literally spend years just thinking about this word, and what are the different ways that you can use that in your mind, in your model of reality, and what are various different pictures that you can draw about what exists. And so, rather than ontology, I propose that we use ontography, which is drawing pictures of what may or may not exist. So it's the real, it's the existing, but it's the graphing. So it's not the study of existence, because you can't. That implies that there's only one existence. Rather, all we can do is draw pictures of existence. And so that's really my whole approach, is that I don't go into any study thinking I'm going to find the answer. I go into all of my studies going, I want to make a new picture. And just because it's a new picture doesn't mean it's better than my old picture either. But it's a different picture, and I'm just trying to collect pictures of reality. So really, I'm just an ontographer.
Yes, it is a very interesting point of view, and as you mentioned, there are many pictures, and I am researching lost civilization and stuff like that. So, how can we deny existence of lost civilization, for instance, of
Mhm.
Atlantis? How can we compare what is more logical, which picture is better? I think that it is very, very hard, and I think that we shouldn't deny one picture because the other fits more into our current paradigm. And as you mentioned, it is all dimensionful. There are plenty of different views, and especially in science, and especially if we want to know the truth, we have to first create those pictures from the evidence we have, and then look at how these pictures maybe are interconnected, and what the true picture, the true image appears by connecting all of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so since you mentioned that, the Atlantis stuff and all that, if so, this is another project that I'm planning to do in a couple of years, once I've got my ducks in a row, in terms of the research I'm doing now. But the Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis epic, the Book of Genesis, from the Hebrew Bible, as well as the Book of Job, in the Hebrew, all appear to be telling a story that when you combine all of those, you have a story of people who are creating a civilization, and that civilization gets destroyed. But also in that story, also then of course there's a rebuilding afterwards. But also in that story, and this is more subtle, and most people haven't noticed that it's there. And in fact, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone talk about this, in the literature. But in all of those sources, when you allow them to sort of inform each other, you can put the subtle hints together, and they all also seem to be indicating that before the story that they're telling, there was a previous civilization. And again, there was a loss of technology before any of these other things happened. And there's a lot of clues, but if you just look at each one of them, like, I'm not even going to mention it, because if somebody goes and looks it up, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Obviously, this is just this." Yeah, but that's the thing, is that they're subtle, and you have to look at them in context, with so in context of where you found them, but also in the context of where you didn't find them. What else do we know about these stories? Um, and so again, I'm really excited about, like, the next 10 years that this is probably going to take me, in terms of really writing well, I don't know. I'll call it, I'm going to say a book, but who knows how many books it's going to be. But yeah, there's so much fascinating material. And I guess if anything, I would just encourage everyone to just start researching. Read as many books as you can. Don't believe anybody in terms of, hey, this is their interpretation of it. Like, so, say, okay, that's a good interpretation. How can I fit that in with this other interpretation? Because the real truth lies in between all of the things that we think we know so far.
Yes, thank you, Ken, for this great and very informative conversation. And can you tell us where viewers can find you and where they can find your books and all of your research?
Yeah, you bet. So my website is called dimensionfold.com. It's actually sort of my publishing company. So there's a bunch of stuff on there that's not exactly relevant to what I'm talking about today. But if you go on there, you'll see there should be a link to my book and to actually to some of my friends' other books, which are also really cool and interesting. And so go check it out. There's also a link to my YouTube channel there. Um, I'm a little bit slow on the YouTube channel right now because I'm kind of doing a lot of interviews on other people's shows like this one, and it's great to be able to have this opportunity. But yeah, dimensionfold.com, my books, my YouTube, my podcast. You can also find me on what's it called? Substack. I just started a new thing there. I'm going to be doing uh, mostly articles, some short and some slightly longer articles. So that will be sort of another source of this kind of information and these sort of odd topics that I think you might find interesting.
Yes, thank you very much, and I think we are all looking forward for your next books and next things because all of that stuff is very, very interesting and can really make a paradigm shift in the future. So I'm really glad that we were having you on, and maybe till the next interview in the future.
For sure. Thank you.